Welcome to AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. Today we begin one of the most fascinating and important topics in this entire course, which is the French Revolution, the central event of modern European history. Things that kind of happened before or after the French Revolution. One can truly say that Europe today begins its modern history with the French Revolution. So, in considering this huge topic, we will go about stages and about what happened after each stage. But right now, the most important topic is what are the causes of the French Revolution? And we're going to talk about long-term causes and short-term causes. And then about what precipitated, what triggered these events as they start in this kaleidoscopic sequence of events. So, the long-term causes. Number one, the long-term causes are obvious from what we have studied before, which is inequality of taxation in France. At the time when taxation was becoming equal or equalized in Prussia, especially in Austria, certainly not in Russia, there was no equality of taxes, and therefore since already American Revolution had happened under the slogan "No taxation without representation," that does become issue number one. Number two, of course, inequality of opportunity, which is privileges for the nobles and privileges for the church. And I think the status of the church is one of the biggest causes because it was truly upsetting the case of Calas and the persecution of the Huguenots and the tax-free status of the church and the monasteries and the censorship. I mean, the church really got on everybody's nerves by the time. In a sense, one could make an argument that French Catholic Church got a payback in a violent overthrow of its privileges and of its position in the Catholic country. So the next one is the laissez-faire economics. In other words, the rising business classes, or in Marxist terms, the bourgeoisie, they wanted laissez-faire. They wanted to do things. And all these tolls and regulations and obstacles were something they wanted to get rid of. And we have already seen it in the writings of Helvetius and Olbach and others. So in a sense, they formulated this agenda: égalité, fraternité, liberté. These are the things that were already in the air. In a sense, one could say the French Revolution is a postscript. French Revolution actually had already happened. Hey, guys, stop all this talking over there. French Revolution had already happened in the minds of the people by about 1570s, 1580s. The ideas had already been articulated, as we have seen, by the French philosophers, and not only for France, but also for the rest of Europe. It was the ideas of a new society that was based on law for everybody, legal equality, that would have no privileges for the nobility and toleration of others, and of course no privileges for the church. So these were the dominant ideas and dominant causes of the French Revolution long term. Now obviously number two is that the French society was ready for it. It was not something that just happened out of the blue. Everybody talked about revolution for years. It was something that the French salons, the ground was already prepared with these ideas and discussions, and the French educated society, rather than just the upper estates, they were already in the revolution by the time it happened. Number three is the incompetency of the French government. I mean, this is, of course, one of the major reasons. We have seen how a competent government of Frederick the Great, or Maria Theresa, or Joseph II, or even Catherine II could do a lot of good things for the country, including some revolutionary reforms of Joseph that could have prevented the revolution. I am perfectly convinced that if the program of Turgot was implemented, the French Revolution could have been avoided. Turgot was a prime minister who was a frequent guest at the salons, and finally when the French government was in total chaos and debt, they appointed him to be a finance minister. And he actually said, look, you gotta have fair taxation. He formulated a bunch of principles to Louis XVI that if they had been formulated, the tax reform, the land reform, the church reform, it could have been done and there wouldn't have been a French Revolution, but of course Louis didn't. So incompetence and blindness of the French government, especially of Louis XVI, is one of the reasons for the French Revolution. Reason number three, long term, is the national debt. And the national debt was catastrophic. It was several state budgets that was given by the government of Louis XVI to the United States. Yes, the United States was leading a war of independence against England, and this was, of course, a consequence of indebtedness of the English, and they raised taxes on the Americans. The Americans said no taxation without representation. They overthrew the English, and the French saw their chance to get back at England for the defeat in 7 Years' War. So they started supporting the American Revolution and the American revolutionary government by giving them money and troops. And they played absolutely crucial role. This is a separate story, but it is the presence of General Rochambeau and the defeat of the English fleet by the French fleet in 1780 that secured the independence of the United States. Yes, the United States got its independence with the absolutely crucial help from the French. But it cost the French a whole lot, several state budgets, and they were in total debt by 1789. They could not cope anymore. And this is the long-term reason, cause of the French Revolution. Number four of the long term is corruption, ineptitude, and total idiocy of the government of Louis XVI and his personality too. The guy is totally incapable of being a king. It's such a misfortune for France that had so many talented people at the time that the king is an imbecile. It's like a child who grown up never knowing what to do. If there's one thing that characterizes Louis XVI, I don't know what to do. I mean, it had no capacity to make any decisions. Even bad decisions are better than no decisions. And this is his total incapacity to act and to do something and to make a decision, take a stand that really was a tragedy for France, which is, of course, the corruption and the scandals, you know, the diamond scandals. We don't have time to go in, but all kinds of scandals, including the lifestyle of the court. And including a very, very lavish style of Marie Antoinette. She couldn't care less about money, and these balls and receptions and diamonds and dresses and hairdos and endless celebration of life in Versailles is something that pissed off a lot of people with obvious consequences. There was a press, there were cartoons, there were hatred was rising in the people, among the common people, especially in Paris, against Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI and the royal couple as such, and with it against autocracy and monarchy as a whole. So short term, it would be most important cause of a short term cause would be the American debt. And finally, the second short term cause of the French Revolution was the famine. So 1787-88 was a bad harvest. France had the largest population of Europe at that time, 20 million people. Of those, over 90% are peasants, and they are going hungry. And of course, when the peasants are hungry, and when there are long lines for bread stores, and then there are rumors that Marie Antoinette, you know, is eating cakes and having parties. Now, the rumor that she said, go and eat your cakes instead if you're hungry is not true. She never said it, but it is absolutely true that just about every single day in Versailles, there was a reception and a party and a dinner and a dance and a theater performance, and they kept on living as if nothing, no hardship was affecting the country. So it is in this context that Turgot, finance minister, and then he was replaced by Necker, who was his friend and who was actually from Geneva. Uh, and I think he was married to a girl that Rousseau loved in his youth, but it doesn't matter. It's a side story. Anyway, they are telling the king that the only way to forestall bankruptcy is to convene General État, Estates General, and ask for money because the government is practically bankrupt. So we could put it like this. The cause for the events that would be known as the French Revolution, like escalating events of 1789, were caused by a practical bankruptcy of the French state and the necessity to raise money by convening General État. So now we go to the very interesting episode in French history is the months preceding the convocation of the General État, which would be in June 1789. The background, of course, is the you know riots of peasants and stuff like that, and attacks on bread shops and bakeries and stuff. But what I'm looking at is the provincial parlement, and they're very, very important. Who are the provincial parlement? We discussed it. It's a mixed bag of people. There's some aristocrats like Montesquieu was there, but there are also a lot of notables, which are middle classes. And they are discussing things. Who are they going to send to the General État? And they send all kinds of instructions and all kinds of pamphlets and things. And by reading the proceedings of the provincial assemblies, the Parlement, you could have a sense of what the French society is up to and what they want. Now, it's a very confusing record and very difficult to understand, but on the whole, the Parlement are against the king. But sometimes my feeling is that they're acting as if they are against autocracy and therefore the people, but in fact, what they really want is to preserve their privileges and their non-tax paying status. So they accuse the king of all kinds of things, but if you push them and say, are you ready to pay your share? A lot of them would say, well, we would rather not. And again, if Louis was a politician, if he really understood what's going on in the country, he could have used it very effectively by turning the tables on these parlements. And amazing thing to me is how inept he was. That he just totally was incapable of communicating politically with the people who attacked him and his supposedly dictatorship, when in fact, it was they who didn't pay the money and who didn't pay their due. At the same time, many of the Parlement contained ideas which would be the ideas of the French Revolution as they come into to Paris to assemble in the Generalitat. So there was a general sense in these provincial parlements that taxes should be more equal. That the church was too costly, that it's okay that it's privileged and it has a direct line to God, but it's expensive. They should contribute a little bit themselves, and not in the form of gifts, but in the form of regular taxation. Finally, they woke up to something Joseph had done already in Austria. They also speak about idleness of monks. And they propose these parlements, these provincial parlements, to confiscate monastic lands, something that Joseph had already done in Austria. And finally, you read in these reports, equal taxation for all citizens. Now, you don't have to be a genius to understand that if these people are writing this in their provincial assemblies, equal taxation for all citizens, when they come to Paris, they probably would the same. So, in other words, Louis had the writing on the wall. He knew if he bothered to read those things. Maybe he didn't bother to. But if you read those reports, you have your pulse on the hand of France, and you could see what the French public opinion wants, which is fair taxation, and equal rights for citizens. So convening the Generalitat in these conditions would be pretty much inviting revolution. And I don't see how Louis failed to do it, failed to see it. So finally, they do convene and they do come in June 1789 to Paris. And there I will finish this segment with just one speculation. If you had a king who was politically astute, if you had a king who knew that that is the agenda these people are coming to, and you need the money as a king, and you want to survive as a king, I mean, you don't need to be a genius to come to a conclusion. The best thing to do is use this assembly to turn the tables on the aristocracy and the church and to say, welcome to Paris, my dear Frenchmen. What we really want to do is reorganize French government in terms of fairness for all and equal taxation for all. If he had done that, he would have been the leader of the French Revolution, just like Joseph was in Austria. Instead, he got scared. He didn't know what to do. He tried to hide away and for several years didn't know how to answer, the demands that started coming from the National Convention. And then, of course, the only thing he could think of how to do is tell them, thank you very much, go home. I don't need you anymore. Once he shut it down, they had no other choice but to proclaim themselves l'Assemblée Nationale. And that is the beginning of the stormy events known as the French Revolution. So we'll finish that first segment. And don't forget to tell your friends to sign up to Brovkin's AP European History.